What we're interested in today is an attempt, we've been talking about level 6 work, we've been talking about conceptual ideas. And Inspector calls can sometimes seem very hard to get conceptual with, because let's face it, it's a pretty simplistic play, right? It's got a very clear message. We've said before, its characters aren't exactly that distinct from each other. There's nothing really complex going on underneath. It's not like Macbeth. You know, so how can we talk about a high level? Well, one of the ways into it is this I'm going to look at today, is to remind you this is a that this is a play. And I think the point I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with getting across the idea of why we should see it as a play and how we should see it as a play. And then later I will just look at a few particular examples from the point being, this is not like when we're writing about a poem or about a novel like a Christmas Carol, where people read and they stop and they reread and they go. This is where, like this right now, you're sat in an audience and something happens in front of you, and it happens once. Okay. And therefore, what some people do when they hang on particular words, specific words their in the play in Act One, say somewhere like that, can be a bit pointless, because are you really, as an audience, going to pick on, draw something out from one specific word? What's more important is to think about it as a play to be consumed, to be seen, to be responded to. And therefore, whenever you're writing about it, try and picture in your head what's going on. Why it's so effective and so useful to actually go and see a production of it. And there's always that touring one that goes around. And if ever it does come anywhere near you, do go and see it. We will make reference to it today. So I'm going to suggest that whenever you write in response to Inspector Calls, you write from the perspective of I'm a member of, and this is how it makes me react. So our key thing to remember is it is a play. And it's a play that we have to look at from two particular perspectives, therefore. Right? First of all, one that you're comfortably thinking about sometimes, that it was a play that was originally performed and it was written very specifically for an audience in 1946. Okay. Now, yes, that brings in a lot of context and other things like that. But again, be very, very wary of information. Yes, we know it's after the Second World War. Yes, we know it's set before the First World War. But try and first of all think about that audience in 46. Try and imagine who they are, what life they're living, what's going on. Every single one of you, or a 1956 audience here, has lived through the Second World War. Okay? Assuming there's not 3-year-olds in the audience. Every one of you has lived through the Second World War. The majority of you will be adults, and the majority of you will have experienced and suffered. Most of you, pretty much all of you, will have suffered grief. Will have lost parents, children, siblings, friends. Okay? You may have fought in it yourself. You may have had someone close to you fighting it. It's going to be absolutely foremost in your mind. 5 years of it, sorry, 6 years of it. 6 years of that experience. Imagine what that's like. For you, that's what going back to way before you came here, isn't it? Going back to you in year 5, isn't it, I think? Imagine from year 5 through to now. Imagine that with COVID. In fact, actually, COVID was 6 years ago, wasn't it? Imagine that had gone on for that whole 6 years. It wouldn't have even been as serious as the Second World War. Imagine how that would have affected the way you think about everything, the way you be like. That's what that audience has experienced, and that's how they're feeling. Now, add to that the fact that this is a historical play. It's presented very clearly to them as something from the past. Okay? Using that analogy of COVID, for example, if we'd imagine that COVID had gone on until pretty much, say, last year, right? Or had just finished, and we'd had to suffer all of that for 6 years. If we then sat and watched a play, a film, whatever, and it was set back 30 years ago, we'd be well aware it's before any of this happened. It will be very clear in our mind. It will be very clear it's a very different time. Okay. And therefore, it gives us that sense of distance. We know that those people in that play have grown up and have developed. And do you remember that with all these people? I'm sure you would, right? You would if you were. You'd be sitting there. You'd be looking and thinking about those characters on stage. You'd be looking at Eric. 1912. Man in his young 20s. He's going to go to war. Okay. Is he going to survive it? Probably not. What's going to happen with Sheila? What's going to happen with Gerald? As Mr. and Mrs. Burley surely won't still be alive now. If they are, they'll be very, very old. How would they have coped with the loss and what they've led through? How's it changed them? He's making sure that we think about all of those things because we're looking back in the past. So it's worth considering it from their point of view. But at the same time, be aware you mustn't sit there and make judgments about what they would have thought because we don't know. We can imagine it, but we weren't there. All we can do is suggest that it must have been very difficult for them. They must have been thinking. What we do know about is today. And the play still exists. Okay? And it still exists to be performed. It may well have been intended to be performed in 1946, but it is still performed today, I just mentioned. There's a travelling production that goes around and tours the country that was first put on in 1992, I think, 1993, because I remember the first time I saw it, I was at university when it first started down there. So it's been going for an awfully long time there. But it still is aimed at a more modern audience. Why put it on now? Why have they thought about that? Why have they made the changes? Because they're now performing for an audience who are not just out of the war. They have very different considerations. They look at things very differently. It's all about a play as an interaction between an audience and a performer. And to consider it from that point of view is really, really significant. There are so many issues in here that are still very, very relevant. In fact, you may even argue that there are a number of things in Inspector Calls that are now much more relevant than they would have been when that production started in 1990 in aspects of the world today. Okay? Could definitely make a case for Mr. Burling being a forerunner of some people who are quite important and in power these days, couldn't you? So that's the first thing. Think about those two audiences and think about it and what's in their head and what they're bringing to that play and what Priestley would be aware they were bringing, certainly in 1946. And let's also consider something about expectations. Now, expectations, this is something you will understand very much more if you think about, say, film. So you go to the cinema to see a film. You know maybe a little bit about it. One of the things you know about it is what kind of genre. So you know what you're expecting, right? You've gone along to see a Marvel film. You know what you're expecting to see, right? You know what ingredients should be there. You know what's meant to be being used. Now, if they play around with those ingredients, interesting. They ignored them, ridiculous. This would have worked a great deal for an audience with Inspector Calls. There are certain genre that were very popular, had been very popular at the time, that are really significant here. One of the most obvious one is this is a detective. It's called an Inspector Calls. You're making it pretty obvious to the audience that there's going to be an inspector, and therefore it's a detective story. He's coming. Why is he coming in? Because he's going to inspect. That's what you're expecting. Now, detective plays were very, very well known at the time. Very, very popular. Okay. Obviously, detective fiction in general was. People like Agatha Christie had been writing for a long time. I think she was still writing now, but she had been writing particularly in the early parts of the 20th century. And there are certain things that people would have therefore been ready to see and ready to understand and take things from. The idea of the closed circle mystery, something very, again, that people would have been very, very used to. Pretty obvious what it says, really. Mystery that comes around, closes back up at the end. You know, takes it found full stage into there. The idea that often happened, and was a popular idea, murderer being on stage at the time. Essentially, you're watching a play, and somewhere on stage is the murderer. Okay, now you can see how he's playing with that idea, right? Because obviously there isn't really a murderer; it's a suicide, and they're all the murderer, really. If that's what comes to it, they're all the people who caused it. So he's kind of taking that idea and playing with it. As we start watching it, we're waiting to find out who did it. Who did it? Who's responsible for this girl? We find out it's all of them. Gradually changes as it goes along. So he's playing with that sense. Many detective plays play this idea of a lower class detective, lower class than the people in the play, who is more intelligent than the suspects, and you can see that's true of an Inspector Calls, can't you? But again, how's this significant to you? It's because he's taking that idea and he's playing with it. He is saying, right, that's what you expect to see. And this one isn't just more intelligent than them. It's more that he is somebody completely different to them. He knows everything. He's something almost supernatural on top of that. So he's raising that game a bit more. And we see how it affects Mr. and Mrs. Burling, particularly, who refuse to accept that he's more intelligent than them at any point. And of course, there will be huge numbers of unexpected revelations. That's what you expect from a detective story, isn't it? You expect a revelation to happen at certain points. And think how he uses those revelations at certain points. If you think back to the play, think of the ones that jump out at you straight away. Is it Gerald's response to, Daisy Renton? What? That often gets a really big reaction in the theatre of people who don't know it. Is it Mrs. Burling having revealed, she knew anyway, when Mrs. Burling had been questioned, having it revealed that she was pregnant? That's a big revelation, isn't it, at that time? And then, of course, those big revelations at the end that he really messes with us with. There wasn't even a police inspector. That wasn't even a police inspector. There may not even have been just one girl. There's no dead body. Revelations that throw and change everything on its head. But of course, the point he's making, I've explored this elsewhere if you look at other previous lectures I've done. The ending, particularly, of Inspector Calls, what we see is that he's using that idea of revelation to make us think, actually, does it even matter? He's using that to take us down the right line of thinking. It's irrelevant whether it's real or not. The point is still the same. So he's not really giving us a detective play because it doesn't work out that way. This is post-World War II. So things have changed since the heyday of the detective play. Is that what he's doing? Is he taking the idea that this is a very different world from the days of, Agatha Christie, those manor house collections of people where it all ends up with everybody sat in the room and an intelligent detective going around and telling them all why it's not them and why it's this person? Are we in the same world as that? Does it matter anymore? That's where I think as an audience, you could think about the significance of this in relation to other things here. Is that why he's playing with this genre? Okay. It doesn't matter like it did before. They're not guilty. You're guilty. And what the inspector says, we all are one body. But it also relates to the tradition of political theatre, and drama students in here may well be aware of it. I think you end up studying Brecht and things like this in the idea of the theatre, epic theatre and that kind of an idea. All of that have been around a lot, idea. And of course, this is very political. Political theatre tended to be about rebellion against traditional social norms. Now, this isn't exactly true of this, but it kind of is at the heart of it. This is less rebellion against social norms. This is more taking a bulldozer through the middle of them, isn't it? A lot of political theatre came out of, in many cases, First World War disillusionment. But the idea that When people get disillusioned, they respond politically. A lot of cases, they get interested politically. After the First World War, and particularly after the Second World War, that was a rise in socialism, which of course is what Priestley was looking for. You're seeing it at the moment in quite an opposite way. People disillusioned and acting with other extreme politics. Okay. The rise of socialist ideologies at the time are also significant to this. So you could argue that he's taking the traditions of political theatre, he's taking the conditions of political theatre, taking the detective play idea, bringing that together and saying, right, it's like you're being inspected for what's happened in the past. Yeah, we're all guilty. But what we need to do is make amends. See how you could use that in an essay and how it would help your approach. So if you've taken that from me, the idea that the way of seeing things conceptually is to see it as an audience, then what we can do is we can apply it to a few particular things that happen. We can look at it very specifically as an audience. These things I want to just focus you in on. The very first one is the opening stage setup. There's a picture there of a production that's been done pretty much in the way that is described at the beginning. Now, I mentioned that touring production that's been going around since 1990. I don't know if anyone in here has seen it. If you have, you'll know it's done in a very different way. It's not got this opening stage setup. And of course, you can do that with any production you want. You can change it. Theirs is quite an expressionist version. Again, if you know your drama things, you'll probably know about expressionism, the idea that you use the set on stage to reflect essentially the state of mind of the people who are in the play and what's going on. And so you have a tiny little house with them inside that then they come out of, and it all opens up and explodes everything. But this is what it says is set up at the beginning. And we can read so much into it from this, because again, imagine yourself, there you are, you're the audience. The curtain opens, or the curtain's already open and it's been sat like this as you arrived. And this is the sight you see. Think of all the judgments that you make at the beginning from this. Now, if we focus in on the detail of what he says in those stage directions, and remember these as stage directions, or it does really, really help as an answer when somebody quotes the stage directions and remembers it is a stage direction. You know, the audience, you're not sat there, and there's not someone parading around saying, by the way, this is the dining room of a fairly large suburban house. It's just for someone to set up. So you have to be aware of that. You know, it's like when you get those descriptions at the beginning of all the characters. People always remember that and like to use it, like Erica's half shy, half assertive. And they like to quote that there, but unless you say they're the stage directions or they're the indications, it doesn't really help. And of course, you've got to remember that that's only advice for the actor. It's not something as an audience we would see. You know, Eric doesn't come on stage and turn around and go, just to let you know, I'm half shy and I'm half assertive, just so you're aware. We'd only see it. So at this beginning bit, the dining room of a fairly large suburban house belonging to a prosperous manufacturer. What will we get from that? Well, we get the wealth and whatever. I'm trying to say fairly large suburban house. This isn't like a mansion. This isn't like top level stuff, is it? Right? It's a prosperous manufacturer. Do you reckon Gerald's house looks like this? I don't. I think Gerald's house is a little bit classier, don't you? Yeah. So again, we're going to recognise it, but it's not the greatest thing of all time. It's wealthy, but that's what it is. And he backs that up by saying to us, and these are all quotes from that the general effect that you should get as an audience, is that you look at it and you think it's substantial. There's, you know, it's big, it's a decent place. It's kind of, look, heavily comfortable, like those chairs would be. Yeah. But it's not cozy and home-like. I think those chairs are really well chosen, actually. If you look at them there. I don't know how well you can see them from the back there, but they're a perfect example of that. You see those chairs around there? They look like kind of comfy in some ways, don't they? You wouldn't sit in those chairs for long, would you? Not the kind of armchair I choose to have. And that's the idea. When we look at this, I think that immediately, if we're sat there playing, and I would genuinely think that the best way of doing this would be to have this set on stage when the audience come in, when they arrive. So you're sat there, you're staring at it, you're looking at it, you're thinking about it, right? And you sit and you look at it and you think, yeah, it's all right, but it's not very homely, does it? And therefore, when Mr. Berlin comes on stage and starts all this, right? You're already ready for the fact that you see the fact is he doesn't know how to create a home, does he? It's not a proper home for these Berlins. This isn't somewhere that comfortable. It's typically Mr. Berling, isn't it? To create something that it's what it should be, but he doesn't really understand how to make it nice. It's like him throughout the play, isn't it? Right from the beginning. He just doesn't quite fit. Right from the first line, which he speaks, and he opens his mouth, and out comes that big broad accent, while everybody else talks very nicely. He stands out a mile from everybody. He just doesn't fit. And the one that I've seen used the best in people writing about it is to tell us how they're seated at the table. Okay? And again, this is the thing. If it was like this from when you arrived, okay, you'd have to have them sat there because they can't walk in, can they? In the middle, they're meant to be there for ages. You could have them sat there having the meal because, of course, it comes to the end of the meal while you're watching. But the key is the seating of it. You've got your table, right? You've got the two ends. You've got two chairs facing us as an audience. You've got one chair facing away from us. It tells us very clearly who's sat where. Arthur's at one end, his wife's at the other. Doesn't matter which way round, but they're each end. Shows off their importance, I suppose. They're all sat at the same time. They're not sat with each other. There's not much closeness there, is there? Sheila and Gerald are upstage. Eric is downstage. Sheila and Eric are sat there. Sheila and Gerald are sat there. Eric is sat there. So just think about that. You're sat there. There's the stage. Eric. Or you can see the back of his head. You're not that bothered about Eric. You're not going to pay much attention to him. Deliberate seating there. Not only is he sat on his own, you're not going to see much of him. Who are you going to pay attention to? Sheila and Gerald. They're looking straight at you. It's their night, remember. You're going to really focus on them to begin with. Eric is still a bit of a mystery. Choices that are made for the audience. Okay? Far more significant than tiny little single words that come out. Then there are dramatic moments. And the dramatic moments, some of the most obvious ones are the photograph. Showing the photograph and the repetition of the phone call. So again, think about these. Because we see them happen several times, we'll notice them. We'll be very, very aware of them. And they are very clear moments because it says whenever that happens, somebody crosses over to see it. Usually, by the way, if you look at it, it's not the inspector crossing over. It's them coming to the inspector, which is significant in itself. Let's think about the photograph then. First person who sees a photograph is Berlin. Okay? Think about how that's done. We don't know there's a photograph before that, so the inspector gets it out, shows it to him. What does he do? Nothing. This is really, really interesting the way it's done. Because as he shows it to them, it says he kind of gets in the way of Gerald and Eric, so they can't see it. And then they start asking questions about why can't we see this? What's the problem here? Any particular reason why I shouldn't see this girl's photograph? And same applies to me, I suppose, says Eric. I can't imagine what it could be, says Gerald. Neither can I, says Eric. All that means that we don't get an immediate reaction described to us from Berling. All we've got is he stares hard and with recognition at the photograph. That's all we've got. And then it's all distracted, all pushed to one side. A lot's left up to the actor, isn't it? But as an audience, think about that stagecraft. Think about that choice by Priestley. He's deliberately making us wait. He's deliberately making us pay attention to what's going on. What's going on with this photograph? How's he reacting? Yeah? Think carefully about that. I mean, sometimes you look at it and you think to yourself, I don't know how you do that on stage. I mean, Berling stares hard and with recognition. You've been in theatres before. How the hell do you in row Z see that he's recognising something? You know? I mean, you look on a close up. He's not going to go, oh, like that, is he? You know? But still, that moment is there. The next one, of course, is Sheila. We're all aware that's even more dramatic because she runs out when she sees it. So again, another dramatic moment. But already remember, therefore, as an audience, in our head, we are comparing what she does to what Berling did. But he sat and looked at it, didn't say anything until he was asked about it. And he goes, yep, I recognise her. Sheila looks at it, and remember, there's more than just running out. It's described that she gives a half-stifled sob and runs out. Now, again, I would be very, very, little cry first, a little cry out, and a half-stifled sob, and then runs out. The two things I'd noticed there in that stage direction, in that reaction, is that she gives a little, and her sob is half-stifled. She's trying to stop it. The cry is small, and she tries to stop the sob. Why? She's trying to hide her reaction, isn't she? Not because she's trying to hide that she's, done anything, because she runs out. So that's not really a big thing there. Is it the way she's meant to behave? Again, and you want to look at this one in more detail. I did one on Sheila a while back, two Sheilas, which is worth going back and having a look at, where I talk about the idea that Sheila is essentially two competing personalities going along. And one of the ones is that she essentially is the woman who's going to become Mrs. Croft at the beginning. She's going to become her mother. She's going to fit into what society wants from her. That woman wouldn't cry out loud, sob out loud, would she? Is that her still doing the same, being the kind of woman that she should be? Maybe. When she runs out, of course, the next thing we see is her come back in, and from that moment on, there's no Mrs. Croft left at all. She's now a completely changed Sheila. Okay? One who would happily sob whenever she needs to. Gerald doesn't get to see, so the next one we get is Mrs. Berling. Again, we get that contrast. Like Mr. Berling, she looks at it hard, and it's clear she recognises it. But unlike Mr. Berling, she lies. And that is a vitally important moment. Because no matter how bad these other people are in what they do, they don't generally lie. Gerald tries to avoid telling the truth quite often, but he doesn't outright lie. Mrs. Berling does. She said, no, don't know who she is. So it's an opportunity to show us the kind of person she is. That dramatic moment of photograph, and to compare her to Sheila. Solid face, no. That's how she deals with her guilt. No, don't know who she is. Sheila runs out and then copes with it. So comparing those three photographs and seeing them across and thinking them as an audience actually helps us a great deal in thinking about the connection between them. Now, the phone calls don't start till late in the play, but then there's three of them in succession at the end. Remember what they are. First of all, we see Berling call up the chief inspector to see if this was an real inspector. Okay? Now, obviously, it's a dramatic moment, first of all. It's made clear that the phone should be on stage right from the beginning, and therefore we'll see it and it's never used, and then suddenly he goes and picks it up. Okay? And actually makes use of it. Phone calls are always dramatic because you can't hear the person on the other end of the line. So you're waiting like the rest of them are to find out what's actually being said. But also it does reveal something about the Burlings outside the house. Remember, the entire thing is claustrophobically set inside their house. The only reference to outside is the stories about Eva. This is the first contact of the play with someone outside the house. Right. And all it does is back up the idea that they might be able to get away with it. Same as when Gerald then takes his turn to call the infirmary. And notice again, he doesn't use the same person. So we see them on the phone. We see each one of them in their phone manner. Again, down to the actors. Think carefully about the fact that it's those two who are taking control and making phone calls. And when it's said, isn't this going to look a bit strange, you phoning up at this time of night? He says, I'll say it's something to do with work. Again, his power means he can do what he wants. He can phone them up in the middle of the night and make strange ideas. But the real thing about those two phone calls is it reminds us of the power of the phone and connecting outside, ready for the last one, which is the end of the play. And the police then call them. Now, bear in mind, both times they call, just then picking up this one, we're going to hear it. Now, that does remind us of something else as well. Reminds us of the two times that the doorbell goes. Right? The inspector, Gerald comes back. Okay? Right? Both of which are dramatic moments in their own right. Noises that interrupt the world. Okay? And of course, famously, and I didn't include it deliberately, the first doorbell changes the lighting as well. Pink and intimate, and then hard and white. So literally that first doorbell changes everything that's going on as well. So what we can do is see moments like this, and you can find other ones in there as well. Look at them from an audience perspective and think, what is the point of doing this? What is the impact of us seeing this? And particularly when it happens more than once, how do we then compare and relate them? Now, the other thing to be aware of is this is in 3 acts. Okay? Do note that very, very clearly. It does say that there. However, you have a choice as to how you're going to actually do this. Are you going to go straight through, or are you going to have a short break? The acts continue straight on through each other. Act 1, the end of Act 1 is, remember, it is Gerald's just given himself away. The inspector deliberately leaves. The only time he leaves while he's there, deliberately leaves the stage to leave them to talk. Sheila confronts him about it. Gerald tries to get out of it, but Sheila forces it out of him. He tries to. He's saying, we don't have to tell the inspector. We don't have to tell him." And she laughs hysterically and says, "Well, you fool, he knows. Of course he knows." And I hate to think how much he knows. We don't know that. You'll see. You'll see. Looks at him in triumph. He looks crushed. The door slowly opens and the inspector appears. Looks at them steadily and searching. Goes, "Well, end of Act 1." So you can, at that point, put the curtain across. Have a break if need be. Have an interval. But certainly, it's a potential break. But when the curtain opens again, at Rise, it says here, the scene and situation are exactly as they were at the end of Act 1. The inspector still stays at the door for a few moments looking at them. Then this time he comes forward and says, "Well," off it goes. So it's a direct carry on, but why place that division there? Try not to use the word cliffhanger. You're not year 6 in there. Think about that idea of that break, that division, that moment of waiting to find out what's going on there. And he does the same with Act 2. But this time it's not the inspector who enters. It is, of course, Eric who enters, right? Again, it finishes with that big build-up. 2, again, quite dramatic moments. Mrs. Burling, broken for the first time in the play, where she can't speak properly. It's ridiculous. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. "Mother, I begged you and begged you to stop." And the inspector holds up a hand. Stop them. We hear the front door. They all wait. They look towards the door. Eric enters, looking extremely pale and distressed. Looks at inquiring stares. The curtain falls. It's moments of drama that the Activision are getting toward. When it starts up again afterwards, exactly the same at the end of Act 2. But it's the attention of getting moments of drama and directing us to those. Again, think about those. They're just a few examples. But what I'm trying to get to with you is that the idea is, if you're going to think about Inspector Calls conceptually, what helps you a huge amount is to remember it is a play. Remember, everything about it is there as a play. We study a play text. We study something that exists for the purpose of people putting on the play, right? Rather than other things. So, keep the perspective of the audience whenever you can. That's my main advice to you. These are my main bits of advice at the end. It will save you from ridiculous choices in your close analysis, right? Picking out slight little words and things I've seen before where people just take a sentence and then absolutely analyze all 5 words in the sentence. Things like, I'm sure you wouldn't do that. But yeah, think about that as a way of doing this. Be careful of stating the audience reaction from 1946 as a fact. Yeah, it can only be assumption or surmise. We weren't there, we don't know. It can be useful, but be careful of it. Think about the structure of the play, just like we've been talking about. Not just moments, but the way they connect to each other. Structure in particular. That's a key part of the playwright's craft. How you put it together. Because remember, as we said before, which you might want to add to what you wrote down about this, remember, as we said before, you only see it through the one time. So he makes choices in how things pair up and match up to allow us to notice things. And the ending is always worth considering as part of your response, especially because it's what the audience are left with. It's what, when you walk out at the end, you've seen. So whatever you're answering on, it's always worth considering the ending, because that will have the biggest impact on you. Take those, come from that perspective. I think it will make a very large difference to your Inspector Calls responses. Okay.